I used to watch her from my window without meaning to. She lived across the street, in the house with the front porch always swept clean, flower pots carefully arranged, and wind chimes that sang every time the breeze passed through. Her name was Maris. I didn't know that at first. For a long time, she was just her, the woman with the dark waves of hair, the quiet eyes, the glass of wine in hand as she stood at the edge of her porch like she was waiting for something, or maybe remembering something she'd lost. My name's Colton. 26, small town in Oregon, a graphic designer who works remote and dreams more than he talks. For as long as I can remember, I've had this one dream that clung to me like an old song I couldn't forget: build a van, hit the road, and just drive. No schedules, no meetings, no one asking when I'll settle down. Just movement and silence and space to breathe. I grew up far away from here, in Ukraine. As a kid, I used to tape maps to my bedroom walls and draw circles around places I'd only read about. Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Route 66. I didn't know if I'd ever see them, but I knew I wanted to try. A few months ago, I found her, my van. A beat-up Dodge B350 that most people would have passed on without a second glance. But I saw potential. She was dusty, rusty, and perfect. I named her the Voyager. I spent weekends sanding, fixing, insulating, wiring, painting. It became something sacred. My hands made it real. This morning, I was strapping the last bungee cord to my bike rack. It was warm out, a quiet morning, and I had that feeling in my chest like standing at the edge of a cliff, not afraid, just aware that the ground was about to change. That's when I heard her voice. Going somewhere? I turned, startled. She was standing across the driveway, one hand on her hip, that half-smile that made her eyes crinkle just slightly. Up close, Maris looked even more striking. Early 40s maybe, tall, with a kind of unbothered elegance. Like someone who used to dress up for parties and now preferred to go barefoot on her porch. I wiped my forehead and nodded. Yeah. Actually. I'm about to finally do it. Do what? She asked, motioning to the van. Take off. Drive cross-country. No plan. Just, go. Her eyes lit up in this way I didn't expect, and she laughed, soft and unguarded. Wow, she said, stepping closer. That's pretty incredible. Not many people actually chase their dreams. I shrugged. Took me long enough. Then, without thinking, I said it. Just a joke, tossed out like a leaf in the wind. If you were my age, I said, I'd invite you along. She paused. Tilted her head. And with a smile that settled into something deeper, she said, what are we waiting for? I laughed at first. Thought she was playing along. But something about her tone, the way her voice didn't rise at the end, made me look closer. She wasn't kidding. Wait, seriously? I asked. I mean it, she said, arms crossed, chin lifted slightly. I've got nothing keeping me here. No kids. No plans. And it's been years since I did anything spontaneous. I looked at her, really looked. The woman I'd watched from across the street, alone on her porch in the evenings, now standing here in the sunlight, asking to come along on a dream I barely believed was real. You're serious, I said again, half to myself. She smiled. Dead serious. My heart thudded once, hard. I rubbed the back of my neck, then gave a slow nod. Well, go pack then. Maris gave me a playful wink and turned on her heel, heading back toward her house without another word. I watched her disappear through her front door, still half expecting her to come back out laughing, telling me she was kidding. She didn't. About 30 minutes later, she emerged with a small suitcase, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a brown leather jacket. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and her eyes sparkled like someone who had just remembered what adventure felt like. "I'm ready," she said. I didn't say a word. I just opened the passenger door. She climbed in like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Sliding behind the wheel, I took one deep breath, then turned the key. The Voyager rumbled to life. As we pulled onto the main road, the morning sun lit the windshield in gold. Maris leaned back in the seat, her legs crossed at the ankle, sunglasses slipping on, gaze turned toward the horizon like she already belonged to it. We didn't speak for the first few miles. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full. Like the first deep inhale after a long, stale winter. I glanced over at her, unsure if this was real. She caught my eye and said, softly, "What are we waiting for?" And that's when I knew, this wasn't going to be the story I thought I was writing. It was going to be better. The road stretched out like an invitation, unrolling slowly beneath our tires. Trees blurred past on either side, Oregon's evergreens giving way to wide skies and long shadows. For the first hour, neither of us said much. The hum of the engine filled the space between us, soft and steady, like a thread we were both quietly holding onto. Maris sat with one leg tucked under the other, leaning back into the passenger seat like she belonged there. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her smile stayed, small and relaxed. I kept stealing glances at her, still not entirely sure she was real, or that this was happening. My van, my trip, my dream, and her. It didn't make sense, and yet somehow, it made all the sense in the world. "I used to do this all the time," she said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Just drive. No destination. No one waiting for me. I'd put on music and pretend I was someone else for a while." I glanced at her. "When was that?" "Before everything," she said. Then she shrugged, like the answer wasn't important. I didn't press. Instead, I reached over and turned on the radio. A crackly old station came through, playing Fleetwood Mac. Maris gave a quiet laugh, humming along. We made our first stop at a gas station that looked like it had been there since the 60s. Faded signs, a broken vending machine out front, and a bathroom key attached to a piece of driftwood. Maris took pictures of the peeling paint on the walls and the old rusted ice machine. "You always do that?" I asked, watching her crouch down to photograph a sun-bleached bench. She stood up and dusted off her jeans. "Beauty's everywhere. You just have to slow down long enough to see it." We grabbed gas station coffee, bad but comforting, and hit the road again. I told her stories from when I was a kid, how I once tried to build a camper out of cardboard in my backyard, how I used to name highways in my sketchbooks like they were old friends. She listened, asking questions without interrupting, and I realized I hadn't talked this much in weeks. The sun climbed higher. The forest gave way to hills, then to open roads that shimmered in the heat. Maris rolled down the window and let her hand dance in the wind. We passed a field of wind turbines, tall and slow-moving like lazy giants. She pointed and said, "They look like they're thinking." I smiled. "Thinking about what?" "Where the wind goes after it leaves." We stopped again at a tiny roadside diner shaped like a train car. The waitress wore a bright pink uniform and called us "Hon" without blinking. We ordered burgers and milkshakes. Maris dipped her fries in her vanilla shake like it was the most normal thing in the world. "It's weird," I said, watching her. "I've lived across the street from you for years. And yet, I feel like I'm only just meeting you now." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. We wait for the right place to speak the truest parts of ourselves. Sometimes, that place is a moving van. Back on the road, the sky began to shift. That late afternoon hush settled in, the lights softer, the air warmer. We passed through a small town with a giant fiberglass cow on its main street. We stopped to take a picture beside it, laughing like kids on a field trip. As we climbed back into the van, I caught a quiet stillness in her face. She looked out at the horizon, her fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The sun hit her just right, outlining the curve of her jaw, the gentle dip of her collarbone. I didn't say anything. Just watched. We kept driving until the trees thickened again, this time pine, tall and dark. A small campground appeared like a secret waiting for us. I pulled the van under a patch of trees and shut off the engine. Silence filled the space again, this time heavier, deeper. Mara stepped out, stretched, and looked up at the sky turning violet. "You hear that?" she asked. "What?" "Nothing. Just, nothing. It's beautiful." We made a simple dinner, grilled cheese on my camp stove, the kind of food that tastes better when the air smells like earth and pine needles. We didn't talk much that evening. We didn't need to. Later, I sat on a folding chair outside the van, looking at the stars. Mara sat beside me, arms wrapped around her knees. A long moment passed between us, the kind that doesn't rush or ask for explanation. She exhaled slowly. "It's strange," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how badly I needed this until I said yes. I turned to her, heart full and unsure of what to do with it. "Me neither," I said. She looked over, and our eyes met in the quiet. We didn't smile. We didn't look away. The road felt quieter when she smiled. We pulled into the campground just as the sky turned the color of warm ash, soft and low. It was a quiet place tucked between tall pines, the kind where time seemed to pause without asking. I eased the Voyager into a flat spot near the back, where the trees offered some cover and the world felt further away. Mara stretched in the passenger seat, her fingers tracing a small foggy circle on the window. "This is home for the night," I said, unsure whether to sound excited or apologetic. She looked around, nodded once, then stepped out like she belonged there. No hesitation, no wrinkled nose or raised eyebrow. Just that calm energy she always carried, like she had already made peace with whatever the night would be. I gave her the bed, of course. It wasn't a question. The back of the van was small but decent, mattress, blanket, curtain for privacy. I had originally planned to sleep there myself every night, but it felt natural to offer it to her. She didn't argue. I grabbed a blanket and made my way to the driver's seat, reclining it as far as it would go. It wasn't much, but I figured it was enough. I'd done worse before. The night had cooled, and everything outside the windshield looked silver. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and let my eyes close. A few minutes passed. Then, soft footsteps. A gentle knock on the window. I rolled it down, and there she was, arms folded, sweater draped loosely around her shoulders. "You're seriously sleeping out here?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, trying to make it sound casual. "I want you to have the bed." She tilted her head and gave me a look, half amused, half something I couldn't name. "You're ridiculous, Colton," she said, not unkindly. "Good night." She walked away, and I smiled in the dark. Sometime during the night, I woke up cold. My neck was stiff, and I'd curled awkwardly into the seat without realizing it. But through the discomfort, I could hear something, humming. A low, soft tune, like someone trying not to wake the world. I shifted, sat up slowly, and peeked through the curtain. Maris was sitting outside the van, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the trees. She was still humming, lips barely moving, eyes glassy with thought. I watched her for a few seconds, unnoticed. Then leaned back again, resting my head against the cool glass, letting the quiet settle in. In the morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. The light filtered through the branches, soft and pale. I stepped out of the van and found her by the camp stove, hair up in a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie that hung slightly off one shoulder. "Morning, road warrior," she teased, flipping something on the pan. Are you always this put together in the wild? I asked, stretching and rubbing the back of my neck. She smiled. Only when someone gives me the good bed. We sat on fold-out chairs, paper cups in hand, watching the sun rise through the trees. There weren't any words for a while. Just birdsong, the crackle of the stove cooling, and the steam rising from our coffee. She looked over at me, one eyebrow raised. How's your neck? Feels like I slept on a pile of bricks, I admitted. You're not doing that again. I'm fine. No, she said, firm but gentle. You're not. And it's okay to admit that. I didn't answer. Just nodded, because she was right. She always seemed to cut through things without trying. We packed up slowly that morning. No rush. She folded blankets while I cleaned out the stove. There was a rhythm to it now, a kind of quiet choreography we hadn't planned but had slipped into all the same. As we were about to leave, I noticed her standing still near the edge of the clearing, just looking up at the trees. Not taking a picture. Not saying a word. Just being. I stood beside her. What are you thinking? I asked. She didn't look at me when she answered. I used to fill every silence with noise, she said softly. Music. Talking. Anything. I didn't realize how much I missed just hearing the wind. The ride that day was slower. We took the back roads, stopped at small towns that didn't even show up on maps. Bought apples from a roadside stand. Sat on a bench by a creek and let our feet dangle over the edge. At one point, while driving, she reached over and adjusted the volume on the radio, just slightly, barely touching the knob. Her fingers lingered for a second on the dial, then rested quietly on her lap. I don't know why that small movement stayed with me, but it did. Maybe because it felt like everything between us was still fragile. Not in a bad way. More like glass. Clear and beautiful, but something you carried carefully. Something you didn't rush. That night, as we parked near the edge of a quiet canyon, Maris curled up on the bed, pulling the blanket around her like a second skin. I started to head to the front seat again, but her voice stopped me. Colton, she said, not turning around. Yeah. Tomorrow night, maybe just stay back here. It's warmer. And I don't bite. I laughed under my breath, unsure if she could hear it. Then she added, quietly, I'm not afraid of the closeness. Just afraid I'll get used to it. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to say. Then I climbed into the driver's seat, but I didn't sleep right away. I sat there, watching the stars through the windshield, heart beating steady and strange. And I thought to myself, maybe we're not running away from anything. Maybe we're finally running towards something that makes sense. Monument Valley appeared like a dream. The horizon opened up into a stretch of red earth and sandstone towers that looked like they had been planted there by giants. We arrived just before sunset, the sky already melting into gold and lavender. I pulled the Voyager off the highway onto a dirt patch that overlooked the mesas, and we stepped out in silence. Maris stood a few feet from me, arms wrapped around herself, breathing it in. The wind pulled lightly at her hair, and for the first time in days, I saw something settle in her shoulders, like something had been released. This, she whispered, not even turning. This is the kind of place that holds you still. We didn't talk much that evening. We laid out a blanket beside the van, opened a bottle of wine we'd picked up in a town we'd already forgotten the name of, and watched the last sliver of sun disappear behind the rocks. She sat with her legs crossed, jacket pulled tight, cup in hand. The light faded slowly, not rushed. It felt like the world had agreed to slow down just for us. At one point, she leaned her head back to look at the sky, and I caught myself staring, not because of how she looked, but because of the way she didn't try to hide that she was somewhere else in her mind. I waited. And then, softly, she spoke. I used to think love was supposed to be loud. Fireworks. Passion. Dramatic declarations. And maybe it is, sometimes. But, maybe it's also just quiet. Like this. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. Later, after we climbed into the van for the night, she pulled the curtain halfway closed and said, "You don't have to sleep in the front tonight. There's space." I nodded and moved to the far side of the bed, careful not to shift too much. We lay in the dark, the only light coming from the moon outside the tiny back window. I could hear her breathing. Slow. Calm. Minutes passed. Neither of us moved. Then her voice came, low and steady. "I got married too young," she said. "Not because I was in love. Because I thought it was the next step. The safe thing." I stayed quiet. He was kind, at first. And then he just became a wall. Everything I said bounced off. Eventually, I stopped saying anything at all. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. I just listened. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because I realized I couldn't remember the sound of my own laugh. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the side of the van. Somewhere far off, a coyote called into the night. I turned my head slightly, though I couldn't see her in the dark. "Do you hear it now?" I asked. She was quiet for a second. Then came her answer, so soft it felt like breath. "I'm starting to." We fell asleep that way. Two strangers no longer pretending to be strangers, breathing the same cool desert air, hearts unsure but open. In the morning, I woke before her. The sun had barely crested over the rocks, casting long shadows that stretched out like fingers across the desert floor. I slipped out of the van and sat on the edge of the blanket, watching as the sky turned brighter, inch by inch. She joined me a few minutes later, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were still sleepy, hair a little wild, but she smiled when she saw the coffee I had already started. We drank in silence. When we packed up, I noticed she folded everything slowly, almost deliberately, as if making sure the morning lasted a little longer. As we pulled back onto the road, she reached for the map without being asked. Pointed west. "Let's find more places like that," she said. And for a while, neither of us spoke. The van rumbled forward, and the red dirt kicked up behind us, trailing into the sky. That night, as we stopped in another quiet place under another stretch of stars, she looked at me and said something that stayed with me longer than anything else. "You're not a detour," she said. "You're the destination." Yellowstone greeted us with cold air and sky that felt taller than anywhere we'd been. The road twisted through valleys of steam and silence, pine trees standing like guards on either side. It was late when we arrived, and the temperature had dropped quickly. I watched Maris rub her hands together as I parked the Voyager near the edge of a quiet campground tucked between tall trees. She stepped out, breath turning to mist in the fading light. Her coat wasn't thick enough, but she didn't complain. Just looked around, eyes scanning the darkening woods, and gave a quiet nod. "We'll sleep in the van tonight," I said. "No tent." "I'm fine," she replied, pulling her collar tighter. Inside, we arranged the blankets, layering what we had into something that looked warmer than it probably was. I moved toward the front seat as I had every night, already pulling the blanket over my shoulder when I heard her voice behind me. "Colton," she said, not sharp, just firm. I turned. "Please don't be stubborn. It's too cold out here. Just share the bed." I hesitated. She could see that. "It's big enough," she added softly. "And we're adults." There was something in her tone that didn't invite debate. Not urgency. Not flirtation. Just truth. She was right. So I nodded and slid into the back, careful to keep a polite distance. We lay on opposite ends, facing away at first, the quiet stretching out like a thread neither of us wanted to pull too tight. Outside, the wind tapped softly at the van, and the branches creaked overhead. Inside, I could hear her breathing, slow, steady, like the rhythm of waves at low tide. I stared up at the van's ceiling, marked by tiny dimples in the insulation foam I'd installed myself. Funny how something so ordinary could feel like shelter now. Then, just above a whisper, she spoke. "Thank you for letting me come with you." I turned slightly, not sure if she could see me in the dark. "I didn't know how much I needed this," she said. I took a breath, waited a moment, then replied. "You're the best travel companion I could have asked for." We didn't say anything else that night. In the morning, sunlight spilled through the back windows, warming the space with a soft, golden light. I opened my eyes to find her already awake, propped on one elbow, watching the trees sway through the glass. "Morning," she said, her voice still quiet with sleep. "Morning," I answered, rubbing my eyes. "How'd you sleep?" She smiled. "Better than I have in a long time." We took our time that day. No rush to get on the road. We made breakfast, instant oatmeal and strong coffee, and sat on a flat rock near the edge of a geothermal field. The steam rose in slow curls from the earth, like the ground itself was letting out a sigh. Maris wore a knit cap I didn't remember her packing. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, but her eyes were bright, reflective. She looked at home, even here, even now. "You know," she said, stirring her coffee with the end of a plastic spoon, "I used to think I was done with new beginnings." I looked over, curious. I thought starting over was for people who didn't get it right the first time. That trying again meant admitting you failed. I didn't say anything. Just let the words sit between us. But maybe starting over is just trusting that something better still exists. Even if it's different. Even if it scares you. She took a sip of coffee and looked out toward the horizon. The rest of the day passed like a soft song. We hiked to a small lake hidden deep in the park, icy water lapping gently against the shore. We didn't talk much during the hike, just moved in rhythm, one step behind the other. Sometimes her hand brushed mine, and we didn't pull away. That night, we returned to the van, too tired to say much. We climbed into the bed without ceremony, like it had always been this way. This time, we lay closer. Not touching, but near. The kind of near that doesn't need to be explained. I stared at the ceiling again, but my mind wasn't racing like before. It was calm. Settled. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket higher. Then, her voice again. "You're not just part of the journey," she said. "You're the reason I stayed on the road." I didn't know what to say. So I reached across the space between us, found her hand under the blanket, and held it. She didn't move away. And for the first time, I didn't care where we were headed next. I just wanted the road to keep going. The Pacific Coast Highway wrapped around the cliffs like a ribbon someone had tugged loose. The ocean stretched beside us, deep blue and endless, crashing waves sending spray up into the wind. The van hummed along steadily, and Maris sat beside me with one foot on the dash, sunglasses slipping low on her nose, her hair tangled and wild from the breeze. She laughed as we passed another scenic viewpoint, elbowing me gently. "That's the third one you've skipped. You scared of heights?" "No," I grinned, "just scared you'll make me take another 10 photos of you pretending to surf on a guardrail." She leaned her head back and let out a full, honest laugh, the kind that made me forget we were moving. "Then pull over. I have at least 3 more poses to try." We stopped at a spot just past Big Sur. The cliff dropped sharply into the sea below, and the wind carried that mix of salt and pine you only find near the edge of everything. She climbed up on a flat rock, arms stretched wide like she was claiming the whole coastline. I took her photo, though she didn't ask me to. When she jumped back down, breathless and grinning, she grabbed my hand to steady herself. Her fingers lingered for just a moment too long, and then let go. We had lunch on the tailgate, peanut butter sandwiches and some fruit we'd picked up from a stand hours ago. A group of seagulls hovered nearby, waiting for scraps. Maris threw them bits of crust while I leaned against the van, watching her. "You ever think about how lucky this is?" I asked. She looked over, curious. "I mean, I didn't plan on having company. You didn't plan on leaving. But here we are. Somehow, it just works." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over, brushed a crumb off my shirt, and said quietly, "Sometimes the things that work best aren't the ones we planned. They're the ones we didn't resist." We drove for hours after that, winding through forested hills and tiny beach towns. Somewhere near Santa Cruz, the GPS glitched, and I took a wrong turn. It wasn't a big deal, just a detour, but we ended up circling the same stretch of road 3 times before I finally admitted it. "I think we're lost," I said, pulling over beside an old diner with a flickering neon sign. Maris didn't laugh. She stared out the window, her jaw tight. "I told you we passed that billboard already." "I know. I just thought." "You thought what?" "That I wouldn't notice? That it doesn't matter?" I looked at her, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. She'd never spoken like that before. "I didn't mean to mess up," I said. She sighed and ran a hand through her hair, clearly frustrated. "It's not about the road, Colton. It's about always needing to be right. Always trying to steer everything like you're the only one who knows where we're going." I felt something sting, deep and unexpected. I opened my mouth, then closed it. The silence between us thickened. We sat there for a few minutes, the engine off, the windows cracked. The ocean was still somewhere out there, past the trees, but suddenly it felt very far away. Then, slowly, she turned toward me. "I'm sorry," she said. "That wasn't fair." I shook my head. "No, it's okay. I do that. I hold the wheel too tight sometimes." "I know," she said. "And I think I needed to be with someone who doesn't always need a map." We let it hang there. Not as an accusation. Just truth, spoken gently. Later, after the tension had passed and we found a small campground nestled near a bluff, we built a fire out of driftwood and sat close together under a blanket. The flames popped and cracked, and the night wrapped around us like a question we didn't need to answer yet. Maris rested her head on my shoulder, her voice quiet. "I don't need the road to be perfect," she said. "I just need to know I'm not the only one walking it." I looked down at her, brushing my thumb against the back of her hand. "You never were," I said. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat there, watching the fire fade and the stars settle into place above us. And in the stillness, I realized something I hadn't known until that night: the road wasn't something we were on. It was something we were building. Mile by mile. Word by word. Together. The road home felt different. We weren't rushing. The urgency we'd had in the beginning, the thrill of movement, of not knowing what came next, had softened into something slower, warmer. The Voyager hummed along the familiar roads like it remembered the way without needing to be told. Maris sat with her feet curled up in the passenger seat, flipping lazily through a dog-eared paper map we didn't really need anymore. The sun poured through the windshield in long, golden lines. Neither of us said much, but we didn't need to. We had driven nearly 7,000 miles. Crossed deserts, climbed mountains, slept beside rivers and beneath stars. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being neighbors and became something else. Not a couple in the traditional sense. Not a storybook love. Just two people who found comfort in the same silence, who'd come to rely on the same rhythm: wake, drive, discover, rest, repeat. I glanced over and caught her watching me. She looked away quickly, but not before I saw the soft curve of a smile she didn't try to hide. Outside the window, pine trees blurred past. Oregon was coming into view again. By the time we pulled onto our street, the sun was already low. The Voyager creaked a little as it rolled into the spot it had left weeks ago. I turned off the engine, and silence filled the cabin. The kind that isn't empty, just full of what you don't want to say yet. Maris didn't move at first. She stared ahead, her hand resting on the dash. "Well," she said, voice steady, "I guess we're home." I nodded. "Yeah. We are." There was a pause. Not awkward, just quiet. She turned to me, eyes calm. "Do you want me to grab my bag?" she asked. I looked at her, heart tugging in too many directions. "I mean, you could," I said. "Or you could stay." Her face softened, and she reached over, placed her hand gently over mine where it still rested on the gearshift. "I was hoping you'd say that." We stepped out of the van slowly, stretching legs that had grown used to long drives and cheap coffee. Her house stood across the street, dark and still. My place, small, a little cluttered, nothing special, waited just behind us. We grabbed her suitcase from the back and walked up to the door together. Inside, nothing had changed. Same mismatched furniture, the same kitchen light that flickered when you turned it on too fast. But it felt warmer now. Like it had been waiting to feel lived in. Maris set her bag down by the couch and let out a quiet breath, the kind that sounds like letting go. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over to the window and looked out at the van parked under the orange streetlight. "I think I like it better here," she said finally, not turning around. That night, we ordered pizza and ate it on the floor, slices still hot in the box between us. We watched an old movie neither of us really paid attention to, sharing a blanket we'd taken from the van. Our legs touched. Neither of us moved. There was no big conversation. No defining moment. Everything that needed to be said had already lived in the way we drove, in the photos we took, in the way she handed me coffee every morning like it was a ritual that mattered. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of her humming in the kitchen. I walked in, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and found her barefoot, hair tied up, standing by the window as sunlight spilled across the counter. She handed me a mug and smiled. "Good morning, roommate." I laughed, still groggy. "Is that what we're calling it?" She shrugged playfully. "For now." Over the next few weeks, life settled into something that felt effortless. Sometimes she stayed at her place, but most nights she stayed with me. I added little things, hooks by the door for her jackets, new curtains she picked out, a better coffee grinder she insisted we needed. The Voyager sat out front like a monument. People asked if we'd go on another trip. We said, maybe. But we both knew it wasn't about where we were going anymore. One lazy Sunday, we pulled out the old map and laid it across the kitchen table. Maris traced our route with her finger, laughing at the places we'd stopped, the ones we never meant to find. I watched her, that same calm expression on her face, and I knew I didn't want to go anywhere without her. "I'm thinking Montana next," she said, eyes still on the paper. I smiled. "Montana sounds perfect." She leaned across the map and kissed me, soft, certain. "I never expected this," she whispered. "I never expected us." I looked at her and nodded, words caught somewhere behind my ribs. "Me either," I said. "But I wouldn't change a thing." The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee and looked across the street at her house. The curtains were open, but the windows were dark. She was still here. Still asleep in my bed. I stood there for a while, the cool air brushing against my skin, and looked out at the van, the Voyager, the beginning, the witness. The dream used to be the road. But now, it was this. And as I sipped my coffee, I smiled to myself and whispered, "What are we waiting for?"